your commandments and commanded us to busy or occupy ourselves with the words of Torah. So we're supposed to really take the words of Torah in, not just learn them, but really occupy ourselves with them. Soak them in. So let's see. Paul, you can share the, well, let's see. Do you want to share the other one? Do you have it right there?
Yep.
Okay. So I don't know how many people know about Lilith, the myth of Lilith, but that's what we're going to look at today. And I want to just say that the reason why this today, because we just started reading the Torah again. So we're in Parshat Bereshit. So this is, I don't know that every month when we meet, it'll be on the Torah portion, but since we're starting at the beginning, this is the beginning. So, yeah. So here's what I want to say about these two, about creation in the Torah, is there are two stories of creation, one in Genesis 1 and one in Genesis 2. And we're going to look at the two stories, and then we're going to look at what tradition did with that, because one of the things the classical rabbis asked questions about was when there was sort of something that was contradictory or missing or a question in the Torah, they would expand on it, right? So the question of, if you have two creation stories side by side, which is true? Why are there two? So there's lots of questions that arise from that in tradition. And we're going to look at one small piece of that, and that's the, and we'll get to that. So, Anna, because I see you in my screen, would you like to read Genesis 26 and 27 to us?
Sure. And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
So we're looking at the creation of human beings. And so there's two creation stories in full, but we only have, a short amount of time together. So we're looking at how humans were created. And so this is not the Garden of Eden. This is God said, let there be man, let there be people. And this verse 27 is both verses. So what do people notice in verse 26 and 27?
I noticed something.
Yep.
And maybe it's been there the whole time, I just haven't noticed. But it says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness.
That's right.
I would have expected it to say in my image.
That's right. And that's in the Hebrew. It says our. So that's one question. Like, wait, I thought we had one God. Who's talking? It's a good question. Right. Is that who's our? Okay, we'll leave that. Anything else? And it's
male and female is man. Man is both male and female.
Right. I wanted to just say, Marilyn, it always has been there. I didn't rewrite Torah today. So, right. And so in some ways, we have all these conversations these days about gender and transgender and what does gender mean. And right here in Genesis 1, we see that humans were created male and female. So Adam is the word here when we say God created man, God created Adam. And it's interesting because here it says in his image, but above it says in our image. So, so we start with a being that maybe is male, but maybe is both, in God's likeness. For sure, male and female, if not all one being, created at the same time, right? Okay, so this is our first moment of human creation. And then, Paul's in charge of the screen now. Okay, so 20 to 25. Okay, so I'm gonna, okay, I guess we can read it all. Who wants to read? Marilyn, you want to read?
Oh, sure. And the man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to all the wild beasts. But for Adam, no fitting helper was found. So the Lord God cast a deep sleep upon the man. And while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that spot. And the Lord God fashioned the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman, and he brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for from man was she taken. Hence a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, so that they become one flesh. The two of them were naked, the man and his wife, yet they felt no shame."
So they're feeling no shame. They didn't feel embarrassed, and they didn't really know it because they don't have any knowledge yet. So quite different. What do you notice either about this text or what's different than Genesis 1?
Well, in Genesis 1, it doesn't mention about the rib. It just said that God created man and woman. And
Right.
now it's telling that it was from the rib that he created woman,
Right.
from Adam.
So two really different visions, because one, they're created at the same time, and in Genesis 1 it says from the dust of the earth, and then from, what does it say that in Genesis 1 or 2? But they're created at the same time, not from the dust of the earth, sorry. And in Genesis 2, woman comes from the body of man. So different different timing, different ways they're created. Also, the one in Genesis 1 is sort of all through God speaking. This is through God. I imagine this like playing with clay, right? Like it's more of an operation. So one is more tactile and one is just the words of God. Okay. So the rabbis say, whoa, how can we have these two totally different stories next to each other, right? We have the 7 days of creation where human beings are created like in Genesis 1. And then we have the Garden of Eden creation story. And so there's lots of discussion about that. But I want to look at one little piece of that. And that is that one way of understanding this human creation is that Genesis 2 could have been sort of a more detailed description of what happened in Genesis 1. So first, God creates one being with two, almost like two heads, two sides, a female side and a male side. And here in Genesis 2, they're separated and become two beings. And that answers the question, how come there's two stories? It also answers this question of they're of one flesh, your flesh of my flesh, right? So that they actually started as one being. And so they become one flesh, and that when men and women come together, that's sort of a rejoining of that. Okay, so that's one explanation. The other explanation, which I think is really much more fun and has much more about it, is that there were actually two different women. That there's the woman who was created in Genesis 1, and then the woman who was created of the bone of Adam. And we know who Genesis 2 is. That's Eve. And we hear a little bit later in Genesis 2 that that's her name that's given to her. And she's the mother of all life. And Eve, and that's the story of Eve we know in the Garden of Eden. But who is the woman in chapter 1? And that is Lilith. And Lilith is not a modern creation. I just want to remind us of that. This is not a something, a 20th century something, but was created in the early Middle Ages and is a midrash that answers the question again of why two stories? How do these two stories fit together? So, and this is a little bit of a longer text, but I think it's worth reading. So again, I just want to say a midrash is a rabbinic commentary in a story form. So in a narrative form, where there's a missing piece in the text or a question of the text and the rabbis write a story. And often midrashim sort of become what we remember, even though they're not part of Torah, they kind of become part of collective memory, like the smashing of the idols in Abraham's house when he follows God. that smashing of the idols does not exist in Torah, only exists in Midrash. But I think many of us sort of associate that with Torah so that these stories can sort of become part of our narrative. So is there someone who's up for reading about the creation of Lilith? It's hard. I can't see everybody on the.
I can read if you'd like. Rabbi.
Okay, Karen, yeah.
The angels who are in charge of healing are Sanoi, Sansanoi, and Semangelef. While God created Adam, who was alone, he said, "It's not good for man to be alone." He also created a woman from the earth, as he had created Adam himself, and called her Lilith. Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight. She said, "I will not lie below." And he said, "I will not lie beneath you, but only on top, for you are fit only to be in the bottom position while I am in the superior one." Lilith responded, "We are equal to each other inasmuch as we are both created from the earth." And they would not listen to one another. When Lilith saw this, she pronounced the ineffable name and flew away into the air. Adam stood in prayer before his creator, sovereign of the universe, he said, "The woman you gave me has run away." At once, the Holy One, blessed be he, sent these 3 angels to bring her back. Said the Holy One to Adam, "If she agrees to come back, what is made is good. If not, she must permit 100 of her children to die every day." The angels left God and pursued Lilith, whom they overtook in the midst of the sea, in the mighty waters wherein the Egyptians were destined to drown. They told her God's word, but she did not wish to return. The angels said, "We shall drown you in the sea." "Leave me," she said. "I was created only to cause sickness to infants. If the infant is male, I have dominion over him for 8 days after his birth, and if female, for 20 days. When the angels heard Lilith's words, they insisted she go back, but she swore to them by the name of the living and eternal God, "Whenever I see you or your names or your forms in an amulet, I will have no power over that infant." She also agreed to have 100 of her children die every day. Accordingly, every day 100 demons perish. And for the same reason, we write the angels' names on the amulets of young children. When Lilith sees their names, she remembers her oath and the child recovers.
So first of all, you have to love the rabbis when you read this, because like all of a sudden we're going from the Garden of Eden to Lilith, the demon is in the sea with the Egyptians. Like this, well, they would understand it as they received this Torah also from Mount Sinai, but I understand it as like fabulous, like imagination of combining all these traditions. I do want to say something personal about this is these angels, these 3 angels that are mentioned. When I had my first daughter, I think someone gave them to me, or I didn't know it was about Lilith, but said that these angels like protect babies. And I put pictures of those, this like artistic rendition of those 3 angels above the diaper changing table. Now, I'm not sure I knew that it was about a demon Lilith. But anyways, I have healthy, much older children. So maybe the angels do help protect babies. I don't know. But so this midrash is really about, can we go up a little bit up, Paul? Just go up a little bit to the beginning of the midrash. Yeah, thanks, right there. So basically, they're saying that Lilith is Adam's first wife, right? So so that when God created male and female, he created them. That was Lilith, right? And then Lilith and Adam fought all the time because Lilith would not be dominated by Adam. And so Lilith left. And then Eve is created as sort of more submissive and from Adam, right? So, and let's see, and also that she then becomes this and that I want to note that she says we're not supposed to say God's name, proper name, but she said that, and that's when she flew away. So, and then she is this demon that, you know, causes illness and death to babies. And I think it's really important to note here that when she's offered to go back to the Garden of Eden, she refuses. Mm-hmm. So it sort of shatters so many of our ideas, right? Like that God, that woman was created as subservient to men, and that the Garden of Eden is a perfect place we all want to get back to. Like there's Lilith being offered to go back, and she's like, I'm not going back there. So that is a theological problem too. Like, wait, what does that mean about the Garden of Eden? And what is it that there's a God that can't get Lilith there, right? She would rather have her demon children die than go back to Adam. So I just want to put that out there. And so it really sort of changes, I think, the way we think of Genesis. And then how does this play out in the like, what does this teach us about the understanding of women, the understanding of creation? So Lilith becomes is dangerous, right? And she's the sort of image of women's sexuality that is destructive, disruptive, dangerous to babies. This sort of opposite of the maternal one who cares for infants. She kills infants. Now, what I learned recently from an OBGYN doctor when I was studying this with her was that there is a 3-week period of particular sensitivity of infants. And so, you know, that 20 days for baby girls is an interesting, you know, maybe I didn't know that there's just something changes at 3 weeks. So I thought that was an interesting thing to note.
I think what's interesting about it, for me anyway, Rabbi Bauer,
Yeah.
that the rabbis knew that. I mean, you learned it from a OBGYN, you know, and I mean, we oftentimes, I think in these midrashim, we come across it's confirmed how knowledgeable scientifically the rabbis were.
Totally. I remember there's somewhere where it talks about pregnancy being split into 3 stages, 3 stages. And I'm like, wait, they had trimesters and maybe they were different, but like, where did that come from? Right. So they knew maybe more than we did, or more than us as lay people. Yeah.
That hits me a little odd that the rabbis would want to write a story like this about Lilith and Adam's first wife. It doesn't seem to fit with most of the rabbinical midrashim that you hear.
Why?
Why doesn't it fit?
Yeah.
Giving women the power to speak and to make up her own mind and not be dominated by man. That doesn't fit.
Right, but then that's true, Anna. But then the woman who
at the same time, yeah,
go ahead.
Maybe it was the same thing. Hi, Rabbi Bauer. Nika grew up in Madison, and his mom let us know about this class. I was going to say, I think this seems like the sort of precursor to like witch trials. Like they're casting Lilith as a demon for not being willing to submit.
That's right. That's right. There's a way, I think, in which it's true, Anna, but this isn't women got to speak for themselves and then they had power. I mean, I guess she has power, but she becomes a demon, right? So like it's the demonization of women's power, right? Right. And this kind of, right, that's right.
I think what's always been an interesting question for me is the Midrash aside, just looking at Torah, why is it that the emphasis, you know, the traditional emphasis among both in Judaism and in Christianity has been the story where Eve is created from the rib of Adam, and rather than the first story. I mean, many of us, I mean, I've been in Torah study groups where other folks had never even they had paid so little attention to that first section of Genesis that they didn't even remember that it existed, because we're so
Right.
programmed to focus on the second creation story. And, you know, so much of Western literature uses that as a foundational context.
Right, and this really, reading Genesis 1 sort of makes you re-question, and then this stuff, wait, what is, who is Eve and why? And then if we were to read Genesis 2 carefully about the apple, I think that also puts into question whether it was really the story that we all know, you know, if you look at the text closely. But I want to say that the rabbis do here, I understand that she has power, Anna, but they make this, that Eve, so Eve in chapter 2 is like creating the destruction of the world because she's eating the apple or whatever, original sin. And then here's Lilith, who is killing babies. I mean, there's not really much more demonic than you can get. So,
well, you know, also that's a very strong message in this midrash, that if a woman in the form of Lilith doesn't do what the man says, she ends up being the bad person in the story.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, that's the same sort of thread that's run through Western culture for forever.
Right, and I think that this, so if you look at Lilith and Eve as a pair, sort of a literary way of reading it is that they're the two sides of the way culture sees women, like, right, the sort of passive Eve, which she's not really passive because she eats that apple, but the like maternal, she becomes, in the world of the midrash, she becomes the sort of maternal, domesticated, passive woman. And then you have the Lilith, who's the like seductress, vengeful, destructive. So we sort of get the virgin and the harlot pair here this early on. And I imagine that, like, and there's so much with the rabbis of how dangerous women's sexuality, their voice, their hair, and all this stuff. So it's kind of like these two, I imagine that this is more about the rabbis trying to sort of understand women, and like, we have the power, but look at all this power that women somehow take anyways. And I don't know, this is about like that struggle, I think, for the rabbis. And how can women's sexuality be dangerous if they're also the like maternal figures for our children? You know, like, I just imagine these two sides.
This is not a midrash, if I may say so, that is taught in Jewish day schools.
No,
no.
I gotta do something. I gotta do something more fun than that, Anna. If I just did the regular, then what? You need more than that these days.
That's okay with me. But I also remember, I think this midrash came to be more popular with the women's lib movement. And there was even a magazine, if you remember, called Lilith. And it was all about women's freedom and freedom to speak and so on and so forth.
That is such a beautiful transition. That was my next part, was that Lilith now, so that's how the rabbis re-understood Lilith, or one way, or Eve, or the creation story. And then in the 1970s, the Jewish feminist movement came and took Lilith as their model. And I want to say that we can think of Lilith before, and so I have something from that. So that's a perfect segue. And I want to say that we have this similar motif with Purim, right? We have Vashti and Esther. Esther is the queen, the typically beautiful, you know, she takes this risk to speak to the king, but she does, you know, she's obedient, versus Vashti, who gets kicked out. And why does she get kicked out? She gets kicked out because she says no to the king. So we have, this is not the only place we see the sort of two women sides. So the Jewish feminist movement took this on, and there are so many poems and what we call contemporary midrashim. So sort of stories elucidating a text written about Lilith in the by contemporary feminists. And as Anna said, there was a Jewish women's magazine that was called Lilith. So the sort of classic midrash that started this Lilith movement, from what I understand, maybe there was before, was Judith Plaskow's. Can you go down, Paul, to the next thing? is called The Coming of Lilith. This was written in 1972 by the great Jewish contemporary feminist Judith Plaskow. And this is her take on what happened with Lilith and Eve, which is quite different. So I think that, how do you say your name? I don't want to say it wrong. Vidya? Yeah. Since you brought that, you want to read this to us?
Oh, sure. Okay. So the coming of Lilith. In the beginning, the Lord God formed Adam and Lilith from the dust of the ground and breathed into their nostrils the breath of life. Created from the same source, both having been formed from the ground, they were equal in all ways. Adam, being a man, didn't like this situation, and he looked for ways to change it. He said, "I'll have my figs now, Lilith," ordering her to wait on him. And he tried to leave her to the daily tasks of life in the garden. But Lilith wasn't one to take any nonsense. She picked herself up, uttered God's holy name, and flew away. "Well, now, Lord," complained Adam, "that uppity woman you sent me has gone and deserted me." The Lord, inclined to be sympathetic, sent his messengers after Lilith, telling her to shape up and return to Adam or face dire punishment. She, however, preferring anything to living with Adam, decided to stay where she was. And so God, after more careful consideration this time, caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and out of one of his ribs created for him a second companion, Eve. For a time, even Adam had a good thing going. Adam was happy now, and though she occasionally sensed capacities within herself that remained undeveloped, was basically satisfied with the role of Adam's wife and helper. The only thing that really disturbed her was the excluding closeness of the relationship between Adam and God. Adam and God just seemed to have more in common, both being men. Adam came to identify with God more and more. After a while, that made God a bit uncomfortable too, and he started going over in his mind whether he may not have made a mistake letting Adam talk him into banishing Lilith and creating Eve, seeing the power that gave Adam. Meanwhile, Lilith, all alone, attempted from time to time to rejoin the human community in the garden. After her first fruitless attempt to breach its walls, Adam worked hard to build them stronger, even getting Eve to help him. He told her fearsome stories of the demon Lilith, who threatens women in childbirth and steals children from their cradles in the middle of the night. The second time Lilith came, she stormed the garden's main gate, and a great battle ensued between her and Adam, in which she was finally defeated. This time, however, before Lilith got away, Eve got a glimpse of her and saw she was a woman like herself. After this encounter, seeds of curiosity and doubt began to grow in Eve's mind. Was Lilith indeed just another woman? Adam had said she was a demon. Another woman. The very idea attracted Eve. She'd never seen another creature like herself before, and how beautiful and strong Lilith looked, how bravely she had fought. Slowly, slowly, Eve began to think about the limits of her own life within the garden. One day, after many months of strange and disturbing thoughts, Eve, wandering around the edge of the garden, noticed a young apple tree she and Adam had planted, and saw that one of its branches stretched over the garden wall. Spontaneously, she tried to climb it, and struggling to the top, swung herself over the wall. She did not wander long on the other side before she met the one she had come to find, for Lilith was waiting. At first sight of her, Eve remembered the tales of Adam and was frightened. But Lilith understood and greeted her kindly. "Who are you?" they asked each other. "What is your story?" And they sat and spoke together of the past and then of the future. They talked for many hours, not once, but many times. They taught each other many things and told each other stories and laughed together and cried over and over till the bond of sisterhood grew between them. Meanwhile, back in the garden, Adam was puzzled by Eve's comings and goings and disturbed by what he sensed to be her new attitude toward him. He talked to God about it. And God, having his own problems with Adam and a somewhat broader perspective, was able to help out a little. But he was confused too. Something had failed to go according to plan. As in the days of Abraham, he needed counsel from his children. I am who I am, thought God, but I must become who I will become. And God and Adam were expectant and afraid the day Eve and Lilith returned to the garden, bursting with possibilities, ready to rebuild it together.
So you didn't know that the first consciousness raising groups of the 1970s were actually Lilith and Eve, right?
Mhm.
So let's see, I'm just going to say a few things and then I want to open it for discussion.
Yeah, I have a question on that though. Up earlier, you make reference to the human community, but community, there's just Adam and Eve and Lilith, right? At this point, what kind of a community is that? Somewhere in the middle, there was some reference about returning to the human community. I was struck by that because I didn't.
Here it is.
Yeah.
To
What kind of a
rejoin the
community is two
human
people?
community in the garden.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Lilith.
Oh, the human community in the garden.
Now, well, you just have Adam and Eve and Lilith, and that's it, right? At this
Right.
point, there's no Abel and
That
Cain
is
yet.
interesting.
So what kind of a community is this?
Right. I mean, I guess more of a community than anywhere else. That is interesting. I
Right.
didn't notice that. Thank you, Jim. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have an, yeah.
And you know, this ties into the thing that the question, after Cain kills Abel, who did Cain marry?
Right.
There were other people around.
Oh, we haven't
If I
even gotten to
remember
Abel and Cain
reading.
yet.
What did you say, Anna? Anna first and then Jim?
No, I just said, I think upon reading in the Torah, there were other people around.
Mm.
I just don't know who they were, but there were other nations.
So I want to say a couple things about how the feminist movement used Lilith, and then I want to open it to more discussion. So first of all, one thing I like about this midrash is that, you know, besides the content, is just the idea that midrash and interpretation of Torah is ongoing, right? So that there's contemporary midrashim, and there's lots of feminist midrashim because, you know, women didn't write the original midrashim. So, but an idea that we can keep re-understanding and reusing Torah. So, so she uses Lilith and Eve as a sort of model for challenging the patriarchy, which is the garden in some ways, right? And, you know, Eve not just being subservient to her husband, and they challenge a system that is set up to make each other enemies of each other, right? And they come together in what we know as consciousness raising groups, and Lilith became a feminist icon. But we also see here that it's more complicated than just like Eve escapes from subservience. We also see that Lilith, who's this sort of liberated one, as it were, if we look at it through that lens, also was lonely. So I think that was a tension in early feminism of like the safety and the safety and the love of the family that was both, you know, not allowing women full freedom, but also leaving it also you lost something. So there's sort of it says both here, I think. But this still says, sort of creates two sides of women, right? There's sort of the, that Lilith is the foil of Eve still, and allows Eve to be the wife and the mother. And we're sort of getting out of that, but we're not quite out of that dualism yet. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say. And there's there's more poems we could read, and there's more midrashim too. There's a whole midrash on the creation of Lilith. Well, I'll bring that up if there's not a lot of discussions. But so first I would love to know how many people knew about Lilith Is this a new idea? And yeah. And also, does this change your view of Eve at all?
Well, the beautiful part of it is how the two women bonded,
Yeah.
and which we know women can bond. And we also noticed that the man, Adam, didn't understand it.
Right.
He was kind of threatened by their closeness.
But Anna, yeah, I see that in Judith Pascal's thing. Did you know
Yes.
about Lilith? Is Lilith something you knew about before?
Yes, I had heard of her.
Right. But you hadn't read the original text, it sounds like.
No, I did not.
Right.
That's correct. You know, in the book, Rashi's Daughters and
Yeah.
others, books like that, they always talk about all the superstitions they had. And the women with childbirth always were afraid of Lilith, the demon,
Yeah.
and how to escape.
Right.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So slightly different. I had heard the Genesis 1 story interpreted as human being created with both genders inside, and that the sort of play that does, there's all this play with pronouns where it's
Right.
created and they had this, and he created him and he created them, and it was it seems to very explicitly say God created this person who is male, who is both male and female. Not God created multiple people, men and women, a man and a woman, but God created. So
Well, it gives a whole other meaning too, that I will not lie below, which is one being fighting over which side of the.
Oh, I never thought of that. Wow.
That's
But
great.
you're right, Micah, that right. It's like we think of pronouns and transgender and all this is like new or whatever, like contemporary, but then you read that and you're like, oh, there it is in Genesis 1.
right, like that Genesis 2 then becomes this this strict separation of genders and saying, no, we don't all have that yin and yang within us. No, we don't all have the masculine and the feminine sort of battling within us. We're separate and we want to be separate, and we need this sort of subservient relationship where the feminine is broken off of the masculine, and it just seems like almost that these are, while one story could be this like Lilith character as being separate, I'd always sort of thought of it more as in the beginning you have the pure form of human as being all genders, all and then the sort of cultural version, which is no, everyone has to be in their lane.
So more like the first story is sort of the divine image of human beings, and the second story is what we kind of did with it.
Right. If God is, if God is in plural, right? Our, we,
Yeah.
then God is both masculine and feminine. God is not just, and if we're made in God's image, then we must have both within us also.
Right. So Lilith actually, this midrash of Lilith actually disrupts that. I mean, if you read Genesis the way the midrash does, then what you're saying is there was always two in the beginning. I mean, it disrupts Genesis 1 in a not maybe way that you like, right?
Yeah, the midrash is saying no, we can't have. It's almost to me it's almost like revisionist. It's saying we can't have this idea that God created masculine and feminine within one being. So let's write a midrash to split the way that Genesis 2 split them apart.
Right. I got you. That the rabbis are saying no, it's always been two genders, and then we're just two women. Right. That's interesting. Thanks.
We see again and again though that like well, at least in the original text,
The original Genesis.
yeah, I'm actually I'm not so well read on the original Genesis, so I'm conflating some things, but for Adam no fitting helper was found. Like, it's especially the contemporary midrash says this in very explicit terms, but that like God's actions are just a response to the prayers of the people. And so we're sort of co-creators and getting what we want out of the whole situation. So it's like, you want binary gender? Poof, you got it. Like,
Yeah.
we're sort of just getting what we ask for, sowing, like reaping what we sowed.
The creation is not something God did of God's own accord, but that God did in response to the desires of man.
Maybe in Genesis 1, God did God's plan, and then after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I got a question for you too. When you were going through, you had on the screen the Hebrew and English side by side of Genesis 1, and I missed the word Lilith. Is it in there? How's it spelled?
Right, no, right. So that's the point. There's no Lilith in Genesis. So Lilith is written by the rabbis,
Right.
to fill in the question of, wait, there's two creation stories. How do those go together? And there's lots of answers, but one answer is there were two wives. There was the Vashti and Esther of Genesis, right? But it is not in Torah.
If it's not written in, so it's not in the Bible, it's not written, it's not in the original text, why did they feel the need to make it up? I mean, it sounds like they got together and made up something that doesn't have any real foundation in the scripture.
Well, I love that question, and that's why I love the rabbis, because if you read classical midrashim, this is what they do. There's a question and or something missing, maybe like, whoa, that doesn't, like, how does that fit together? And then they create a world around that. So kind of why are they allowed to do that almost? Yeah, it's let me give not a laughing answer, but the rabbis themselves said that they heard Torah on Mount Sinai as well, or not they did, no, not that they did, sorry, that there's the written Torah that we see from Mount Sinai, and then there's what's called the oral Torah. And the rabbinic writings are understood as oral Torah, that they're not the rabbis' creations, but that they were heard at Mount Sinai and passed down, and the rabbis wrote them down. So that's the kind of traditional answer to that it's also from Mount Sinai. It doesn't hold as much kind of weight.
Let's remember that the Ben Sira is written, 700 to 1,000 Common Era. And since that time, especially in the more modern and the Reform movement, we understand that there were different texts that got sewn together to make the Torah as we know it today. These people did not know that and had to come up with a way to explain every single difference in the Torah.
Right.
Well, it's in the pretzel knots that they have to twist themselves into when they're doing sacred reading. Like, they're not questioning authorship here. Why is Genesis 1 like this and Genesis 2 like that? If you remove the possibility to question, authorship and authorial intent, then they're like in this pretzel situation. And very much like responding with the artifacts of like who they are. Like, clearly Judith Plaskow holds herself to no such bar.
Why do you think Judith's any different about, like, I mean, in some ways she's just responding with the moment of her time, right?
She is, but I think that she is, there's a lot here that feels like very clear, sort of tongue-in-cheek response to the original Midrash in a way that I don't think the rabbis were doing.
Yeah. But some people say that I had a Midrash teacher who thought that there was more humor in the rabbis than we maybe know. So, I mean, or maybe not that we know, but that we hear. Well,
I think it was like we recently heard the story of some student,
in the Talmud,
whoever, is underneath his teacher's bed while and he says, this too is Torah. So like, there's a lot of humor there. But in this particular story, I think the rabbis are very serious about this.
Yes, before you go on, Jim, you're right. And also they do twist and pretzels to make it all fit together, because in the rabbinic view, it all is whole and it's all complete. God doesn't make mistakes. So if there's something that's missing or confusing, they have to like make it work. So you're right, there's a lot of pretzel twisting, and you're right that Judith Plaskow probably doesn't have that same viewpoint. Yes, Jim, please.
Yeah, you make it sound from what you're saying a lot like the New Testament. In the story behind the New Testament is the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then they say, well, there were other ones too. There was the Testament of Judas, for example, and the Testament of lots of other people, and a group of clerical leaders in the like 1,000 around 100 A.D. or so, maybe it was 300, got together and sorted through and say, well, we're going to throw these out and we're going to throw those out, and they put together what now is handed down as the New Testament, as dictated by Jesus. But in fact, there were a lot of things that were like left out. It didn't make the cut. And I didn't think that the Torah was in that same category, that there were missing pieces that were like created later. I thought this is the way it was written down. That's the way it is. You don't have this sort of Christian conflict between what to include and what to exclude.
Oh no, I mean, and also if you read scholarship on the old, on the Hebrew Bible, academic scholarship, as Irv said, understanding that there were different authors and different pieces that were woven together. Yeah.
But not even that. I mean, the story of the Maccabees, which we kind of in modern times understand as being this historical thing, the rabbis said, oh no, we don't want to celebrate violence. We're cutting the story of the Maccabees from the Bible, from the Tanakh. And so it's not part of the Tanakh. It's not a story that we consider canon. They literally just cut it out and said, no, we don't want the book of the Maccabees.
Right. So that we have our own apocrypha. Yeah. Yes, Laura, please.
Getting back to Genesis 1,
sure.
Where did all these children come from? That 100 of her children aren't going to be slain.
That's you.
The flying, right. I don't know. I wondered the same thing when I read this, like, who are the children? And so she's a demon, and in other places she's seen as Lilith is connected to the word for Lila, for night. So she's like this night demon. And I guess she has all these demon children. She must have a lot if 100 can die every day.
Right.
I mean, it'd be million, right?
I guess demons can do that.
I mean, I'm vaguely remembering, Rabbi Renee, that there's another midrash that talks about Lilith robbing sperm or something. Is that, am I making that up?
No, you're really not making it up. No, yeah, I think there's.
So she could have, been doing some artificial insemination.
I wonder if she used a turkey baster.
Yeah.
Who knew it was that old a concept?
Right.
No, I think it's actually, I might have it here. Yeah. I know what you're talking about. It might, yeah.
Yeah, so it is a midrash, I think, that I just
think so.
I can't cite the reference.
But there's also a whole thing about that sort of the problem with women in the world, or the problem, as we, the reason women are more problematic is because they're created from the bone versus from the dust. There's all these reasons. The bone makes us more stubborn, and the bone. So that was the other one I was going to read, and I can't remember if the sperm thing is in here, but I don't want to try and find it right now. But so anyways, so that is a different take on Lilith, and yes, Lilith is not in Torah, but is, I think, part of our week of studying Bereshit. We should bring her in. There's lots and lots of contemporary poetry on Lilith. And so I guess a question to leave is, if anyone wants to answer, like, is there anything we can use or learn from Lilith in our day? I mean, Judith Plaskow used it in the 1970s. We still have a lot to do that they started, but, is there any way that this speaks to us or helps us? I don't know.
At the end of Judith's midrash of her own, she used words. I can't remember what it referenced, but her words were the same, almost the same as when Moses asked for God's name. And he says,
Oh, yeah.
"Ahia, Asher Ahia." She kind of used the same theme.
Yep.
Which
Yeah,
I
that
found,
God is also becoming, right? That we're all in
right,
the process of becoming, right?
which is an interesting effect, I thought, to a midrash.
Yeah, yeah. Right, this all challenges God very much. Like the other midrash I had that I just didn't think we had time for talks about how God tried to create women as chaste and subservient and didn't succeed. But like, what does that mean? Like, isn't God all powerful, right? Like, what do you mean God is becoming? Isn't God like who God is? Like, if God is also becoming, this all sort of challenges our theology at the same time that it looks at gender, I think. So.
The first time I ever heard the word Lilith,
Yeah.
I was familiar with the story Adam and Eve and the serpent and the snake and the apple or the fruit or whatever. And I don't know how old I was when I first heard the word Lilith, and it was introduced as sort of Eve's evil twin, you know, and I thought, oh, they're just making this up. You know, I didn't, and they're, you know, making her to be the evil opposite of every, you know, good, bad, black, white, whatever. That Lilith was sort of the evil twin of Eve. And I you know, I thought they were just like, somebody's just making this stuff up. I just, no reference to it in the Bible that I'd ever seen.
Right.
No.
Yeah. And also, I think that's like a really classic thing, right? The sort of evil twin, the two sides of women. And yeah.
One thing I like. Sorry.
I just find it comforting that in Genesis 1, there's a story of a woman who's created kind of equally and not out of the bone of somebody. You know, I just find that comforting.
Yep.
I really like that too. It's just kind of striking to me how Lilith takes a deep dive into, you know, all this dark, you know, with 100+ children. And so it kind of feels really egalitarian and empowering. And then like now there's this whole other dark part. And I find myself really curious to learn more, you know, a more full story about all of that.
The rabbis also didn't have a very liberated view of women. Let me just put it that way.
I'm looking at the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 excerpts, and you know, you mentioned that the name Lilith doesn't come up in Genesis, that it's a name given in the Midrash. Is there, are there verses between these that would connect Adam to the person created in Genesis 1? So that, like, or does Adam, do you see what I'm saying? Like, we know that the female part of this creation in Genesis 1 is not Eve, because Eve is then created from the rib of Adam. But how do we know that Adam is the male part?
So it does say, it calls both of them Adam in Hebrew. So the man in Genesis 1:27, where it says created man, he created them, that word man is actually Adam. So yeah.
But that would be true whether or not the name of that person
so per Mika's sort of like tale, Adam could be this non-binary figure, who's then put into Adam and Eve.
Yeah, Adam and Chava, yeah.
Some contemporary rabbis don't use the word, when they translate it to English, they use the word human instead of man, to translate Adam. The Hebrew Adam, they translate it as human.
Okay.
And Adam, by the way, comes from the same root as earth, like
Adama.
Adama, yeah.
Right. So, you know,
so right there, you have just in the grammatical construction of Hebrew, you have male and female all in one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If Adam is created from Adama, then you have this non-binary creation.
Because Adam is male and the
And
is
Adama
female.
is,
Yeah.
right, right.
If dam is blood, is that connecting blood to soil?
I don't think
I
it's
don't
the
think
same
so.
root. No,
I
so
think it's a
roots are
different word.
different root.
Two different
Yes.
But good job. Maybe, yeah,
Yeah.
but nice. Yeah. Well, I just like to end before people have to get off. And it's, so I hope to see you guys next month. If you're not, I know that, Mike and Vidya, you said you got this from your mom, but you can email us and get it yourself. And where are you calling in from?
So we're in St. Louis now. We were actually just in Madison last weekend with our parents. But
So anyways, I hope to see you next month. We're going to either I haven't really made the whole plan, but either Torah study or something on the holidays. And yeah, everyone stay
The
safe.
past holidays?
The what? No. I mean, just generally over the
general.
year.
Oh, good.
General.
Okay.
No, we'll
Okay.
move on. We've done enough high holidays.
Exactly.
No,
Thank
enough high
you.
holidays. I just meant either Torah or holidays or both. Sort of
Okay.
push study, not, yeah.
Great. Okay.
We'll announce the topic before, and just everybody stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
wonderful. Wonderful.
enjoyable. Very enjoyable.
So long, everyone.
Bye, Karen. Bye, everybody.
Bye.